On my 68th birthday, the morning began with the kind of silence that feels too sharp, too deliberate, as though the air itself were holding something back. There were no balloons, no phone calls from family, no laughter of grandchildren running through the house, because there were no grandchildren who called me theirs. Just silence and the steady ticking of the wall clock above the stove. And yet, when I opened the front door, there it was, a package. Brown paper, no ribbon, no card, just my name written in a careful hand that I recognized immediately. It was the handwriting of my son, Ethan. My son whom I had not seen in 3 years, whose voice I had not heard except in memories replayed at night when the house was too quiet for comfort. A son I had raised for 2 decades, through scraped knees, broken bicycles, late-night homework battles, and arguments over curfews. A son who had drifted away, not through one violent argument, but through silence that stretched itself so long it eventually became the new language between us. My hands froze on the box because I knew that script. The neat, deliberate strokes. I would have known it even blindfolded. And yet my chest tightened in a way that was not joy, not relief, but something darker, heavier, a reminder that absence leaves its own mark. The package was light enough to carry inside, but heavy enough in meaning that it felt like it burned through my palm. I set it on the kitchen table and just looked at it for a while, my coffee cooling beside me. Eventually, I tore through the tape and opened the box. Inside was a bottle of whiskey, not just any whiskey, but a limited edition single malt, the kind of bottle collectors put on a shelf and brag about owning. The glass glowed with the amber liquid inside, and the label shimmered deep green with golden lettering, the kind of design that spoke of expense more than taste. My fingers ran over the wax seal covering the cork. I felt the smooth surface under my thumb, and for a moment, I was transported back to when whiskey was my ritual. A glass in the evening after a long day of fixing fence posts, painting walls, or working in the yard. A glass that Linda, my late wife, would pour after dinner. We'd sit on the porch swing, sip quietly, and let the crickets sing the rest of the conversation. But that was before the heart attack, before the doctor gave me a long list of things I could never touch again if I wanted to see another birthday candle. I had not tasted a drop in 3 years, and Ethan knew it. He had been there in the hospital, watching me hooked up to machines, the doctor speaking with authority about the risks. Ethan had barely looked up from his phone, thumbs moving, face lit by the blue glow of the screen. I had told myself then that he was distracted, maybe scared. But now, looking at the bottle in front of me, I wasn't so sure. Because the gift was not thoughtless, it was something else. I turned the box over and found a plain white envelope taped to the side. Inside was a card with 2 words written in blue ink. Happy birthday. No dad, no love, no signature. Just words that stood there alone, as though they were afraid to reveal anything more. I slid the card back and pushed the whiskey to the far side of the table, where the morning light caught it like fire trapped in glass. I sipped my now cold coffee, and the clock ticked on, marking a silence that felt heavier than before. Later, I thought of Robert Carson, my old friend and Ethan's father-in-law. Robert was the kind of man who never came empty-handed, never waited to be asked for help. 2 summers ago, after a storm ripped half the shingles from my roof, Robert was at my house by 8 in the morning, hammer in hand, climbing ladders before I even realized how much damage had been done. He was that kind of man, solid, dependable, generous. If anyone deserved something nice, it was him. And since I couldn't drink the whiskey, leaving it to gather dust on my shelf seemed wrong. Better to give it to someone who would open it, share it with friends, and tell a story about it years later. By afternoon, I buckled the bottle into the passenger seat of my Chevy. Habit maybe, but the thought of it tumbling on the ride made me uneasy. The October sun was beginning to tilt west, painting the fields with that warm amber glow unique to autumn. County Road 6 stretched out ahead, flanked by fields cut down to stubble, the air carrying faint smoke from burn piles. Robert's house sat on a rise at the edge of town, white clapboard with a wraparound porch that looked plucked from a postcard. Gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled in. Robert opened the door before I could knock. He wore a red flannel shirt and jeans, sawdust still clinging to his boots. His eyes went immediately to the bottle. "Frank, what's this?" he asked. "From Ethan," I said, handing it over. His brows rose. "Ethan sent you this?" "Yeah," I replied. "Figured you'd get more use out of it than I would." Robert turned it carefully in his hands, reading the label. This is something, Frank. A bottle you'd save for a special night. Then make tonight special, I said honestly. He grinned, clapped me on the shoulder, and thanked me. I drove home with the sun slanting across the dashboard, but I couldn't stop thinking about the gift. Ethan was not the type to spend that kind of money without a reason. As a boy, he'd borrowed cash for gas and forgotten to pay me back half the time. So why now? Why a bottle he knew I couldn't drink? The question nagged me through dinner, through washing dishes, through the tick of the clock. That night, the phone rang, startling me. Almost no one called the landline anymore. I picked it up, and his voice came through, smooth, casual. Hello, Dad. Ethan. My heart stopped for a beat. Ethan, I said slowly. Happy birthday, he added, a beat too late to sound genuine. You got my gift? I did. Well, what do you think? It's a nice bottle, I answered carefully. Did you try it yet? His tone sharpened at the edges, just slightly. No. I gave it to Robert. Thought he'd enjoy it. Silence stretched on the line, long and deliberate. You gave it to Robert? His voice had gone cold. That's right. A slow exhale filled the line, then nothing. He hung up. I stared at the receiver, unsettled. Why had he cared so much whether I drank it? That night, sleep came reluctantly and left me feeling more tired in the morning. The following day, my phone rang again. This time a local number I didn't recognize. Mr. Dalton, a woman's voice said. This is Linda Carson. Robert's in the hospital. My stomach dropped. Hospital? What happened? Her voice was tight, frayed at the edges. He collapsed this morning. They think it might be poisoning. The word burned in my ears. Poisoning. She explained that Robert had been fine last night. They'd shared a drink at dinner, but by morning he couldn't stand. My eyes flicked instinctively to the counter, to the empty spot where the whiskey had been. Did he eat anything unusual? She asked. My mouth was dry. No, I said slowly, but I gave him a bottle yesterday. From Ethan. Her pause said everything. I heard hospital noises in the background. Monitors, footsteps, the squeak of wheels. I'll tell the doctors, she said finally. When I hung up, the house seemed to shrink around me. I stood still for what felt like an hour. Then something white in the trash caught my eye. A small plastic vial. No label, just a dusting of powder inside. I didn't remember throwing it away. My hands shook as I retrieved it. On the fridge shelf sat a mason jar with a half cup of whiskey I'd poured out before giving Robert the bottle. I hadn't even remembered keeping it. I knew someone who could help. Gary, an old army buddy, now in a veterinary lab. He owed me a favor. I called him. Gary, I need you to test something quietly. What is it? Whiskey. And maybe something else. That evening, I drove to his lab with the jar wrapped in a paper bag. He took it without questions. The next day he called. Frank, he said carefully, you're not going to like this. The whiskey contains white snakeroot. In the right dose, it'll stop a man's heart. My hand went cold around the phone. Robert drank it. But you didn't. No, then you may have just dodged a bullet. I hung up, but the words felt like a stone dropped into deep water, rippling out endlessly. My son had sent me poison. Not a gift, but a message. And the worst part, the story was only beginning. I spent that night pacing the living room, the shadows of the ceiling fan slicing the floor in uneven stripes, thinking about Ethan, the whiskey, the vial, the word poisoning that hung in my mind like smoke I couldn't blow away. I thought of every birthday, every scraped knee, every quiet moment of teaching him how to ride his bike or fix a loose hinge, and I realized that somewhere along the way, my son had become a stranger with eyes that could see right through me and intentions I could no longer predict. Morning came, and I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. I needed answers, and more importantly, I needed to make sure Robert was alive and safe. I called Linda Carson again. How is he? I asked, my voice tight. She sighed, relief and tension mixed. Stable. Doctors say the dose was low enough to trigger symptoms, but not fatal. He's resting now. But Frank, they don't know how it happened. It's just so strange. Strange was the word for it. Strange that my own son could cross that line. Strange that I'd been blind to the distance growing between us. I left the house before breakfast, drove to the hospital, and walked into Robert's room. He was pale but sitting up, coffee in hand, a weak smile lighting his face. Frank, you saved me, he rasped, and I squeezed his shoulder, feeling a surge of protective anger I hadn't felt in years. We need to figure out who did this, I said quietly. I have a guess, he murmured, eyes narrowing. But it's not something to rush. He's clever, careful. You need proof before you act. Proof. The word hung between us. I thought of the small vial, the powder, the carefully packaged bottle with my son's neat handwriting. Proof, yes, but confronting a son with the power to poison someone he claimed to care about, it wasn't just terrifying, it was catastrophic. I spent the next hours retracing my steps, thinking, questioning, turning every memory of Ethan upside down. Who was he now? When did the boy I raised, who once clung to my sleeve crying over scraped knees, become the man capable of calculated harm? My phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Then I opened it. One line. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? No sender name, no signature. Just that. My pulse raced. I knew it was Ethan. I knew that tone. Threat disguised as curiosity. And then another text came, seconds later. Robert is fine, for now. But you, Dad, you've been warned. I dropped the phone onto the bed, my hands trembling. Every instinct screamed to call the police, to barricade myself, to hide. But part of me, the part that still loved the boy who had once held my hand in the dark, wanted to understand why, to find some reason that didn't involve evil. That afternoon, I returned home and found the whiskey still there, untouched. I picked up the bottle, turned it over in my hands, and noticed a new detail I hadn't seen before. A tiny inscription etched into the glass near the base. My breath caught. I see everything, Dad. It wasn't part of the original label. It had been added. Someone had planned this. Someone had sent me a message that was meant to terrify me. And the realization hit like a punch to the gut. Ethan wasn't just angry. He wasn't just reckless. He was methodical, calculated. And now he was watching me. All the walls I'd built to keep the past at bay, the silent resentment, the missed calls, the years of quiet disappointment, crumbled. I felt the room shrink, the shadows deepen. I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. I couldn't let this stand. I had to confront him, but not before I uncovered the full scope of what he'd planned. I spent the next day gathering every scrap of evidence, every phone record, every transaction, and every memory that could prove what had just happened. By evening, I was ready. I dialed his number. No answer. Voicemail. Again, nothing. I drove to his apartment, heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt since the night Linda called with Robert's collapse. The door was slightly ajar. I froze, every instinct screaming danger. Then I saw it. The living room, meticulously cleaned, except for the small table near the window where a second vial sat, identical to the one I had found in the trash. And next to it, a note, written in the same careful handwriting I knew so well. One move, Dad, and the next gift isn't whiskey. My hands went cold. My mind raced. My son had crossed a line I could never have imagined. And as I stepped closer, the front door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the walls. I spun around, heart hammering, and froze. In that instant, I understood something I had refused to see. The boy I raised was gone. And in his place was someone I barely recognized. Someone who had learned every way to break me, to manipulate fear, to command silence. And I had just walked straight into his game. The shadows of the room stretched long, swallowing the light, and I realized with a sinking certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Ethan was no longer just my son. He was a predator in plain sight. And the next move? I had no idea. But I knew one thing. Whatever happened next, I was in the center of it. And as I stood there, the phone buzzed again. One message. Welcome to the real game, Dad. Let's see how far you'll go to survive. I dropped to the floor, my hands clutching the phone, eyes darting around the room. The words echoed in my head. Let's see how far you'll go to survive. The calm, controlled menace behind them made my blood run cold. Every instinct screamed to run, to call for help, but I knew it would play right into his hands. Ethan wanted fear. He thrived on it. And now he had it. I moved slowly toward the table, careful not to touch anything, scanning the vial again. The powder inside looked harmless, almost benign, but I knew better. I remembered the white snake root, how little it took to turn a life upside down. A shiver ran through me. Someone so methodical, someone who had learned from me, from our family history, wouldn't leave anything to chance. And he had learned everything. The apartment was too quiet. No hum of the fridge, no distant traffic, nothing. My ears strained for a sound, any sign that he was still there. or that he had already left, watching from somewhere unseen. My phone buzzed again. Another text. Short, chilling. You're slow, Dad. Too slow. I realized then that I had to stop reacting and start acting. I couldn't just survive his game. I had to understand it. I needed answers. And somewhere deep down, a darker part of me, one I had long buried, wanted to see the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. I searched the apartment carefully, every drawer, every cabinet, every shadow. Nothing. It was as though he had vanished into thin air, leaving only the threat and the message. And then I noticed the laptop on the counter, open, its screen glowing faintly. A single document was open, titled simply Dad. My heart slammed against my ribs. I hesitated before touching it, knowing that whatever I read would change everything. My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. Slowly I clicked. The screen filled with a message, typed in the same meticulous handwriting I knew so well. Everything you taught me, Dad, every lesson, every mistake, every weakness. I watched, I learned. And now it's my turn. If you want Robert alive, if you want yourself alive, follow the rules. One wrong move, and it's over. The first challenge begins tonight. Be ready, or don't show up at all. The words burned into my eyes. My stomach turned, but beneath the fear, a spark of resolve ignited. This was my son, or at least the man he had become, but I was still his father. I couldn't let him win. Not completely. Not yet. I stuffed the laptop into my bag, grabbed the vials, and left the apartment, locking the door behind me. The streets were quiet, eerily so, as I drove toward the outskirts of town where Ethan's message had instructed me to meet. My mind raced through every memory, every interaction, trying to find a clue, a hint, any way to anticipate what he might do next. I arrived at an abandoned warehouse just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The doors were ajar. Inside, shadows shifted, tall and menacing. And there, standing in the center of the open floor, was Ethan. Calm, collected, his eyes cold and calculating, just like the boy I had once comforted after scraped knees, but infinitely more dangerous. "Welcome, Dad," he said, his voice smooth, taunting. "Ready to play?" I stepped inside, the door creaking behind me. Every instinct screamed to run, but I forced myself forward. The floorboards groaned underfoot, echoing in the empty space. And then I saw it. A series of objects laid out across the warehouse floor. Not random. Each one meticulously placed, each one connected to a memory, a lesson, a failure. And in the center, a single note in his familiar handwriting. "Choose wisely. Your next move decides everything." I froze. My pulse raced. Ethan smiled faintly, almost approvingly, as if he were watching a chess game unfold, and I was the only piece left to move. And in that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't just a game. It was a test. A reckoning. And no matter what I did next, one wrong choice could cost more than my life. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. My mind sharpened. I had to outthink him, to anticipate the unimaginable. But even as I squared my shoulders and stepped closer, I couldn't shake the feeling creeping up my spine. Ethan wasn't just challenging me. He was rewriting everything I thought I knew about my own son. And the first challenge? It was about to begin. I stepped cautiously toward the objects, each one a twisted reflection of a memory we shared, each one a trap of its own design. My hands trembled, but my mind raced faster than fear could catch it. Ethan's voice broke the silence again. Calm, almost casual. "Pick the first one, Dad. That's your choice." I studied the items, and suddenly it clicked. This wasn't about hurting me directly. It was about testing me, about forcing me to face the weight of every lesson I'd taught him, every moment I had overlooked, every mistake I had made as a father. My pulse surged. I reached for the first object, a small wooden box etched with the date of his 5th birthday, and opened it. Inside was a single puzzle piece, carefully carved, its edges sharp. I understood immediately. It was a metaphor, a challenge. The puzzle had to be completed correctly, step by step, or the consequences would be fatal. I looked at Ethan, his eyes glittering with satisfaction, and I realized he wanted more than obedience. He wanted me to prove that I could think, anticipate, and survive using what I had taught him all those years ago. I took a deep breath, forcing calm into every motion, and began to work on the puzzle, my hands steadying as logic took over. Minutes stretched into an eternity, but I kept moving, keeping the rhythm, keeping my mind sharper than my fear. Ethan circled me slowly, silent but present, watching, judging, learning. The final piece clicked into place, and I held my breath, waiting. He paused, studying the completed puzzle. Then, slowly, a faint smile curved his lips. "Well done, Dad," he said, almost softly, almost like the boy I once knew. Relief and exhaustion flooded me, but I didn't relax. Not yet. He had won this round, but the war was far from over. He handed me a folded envelope, careful, deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of my survival. My hands shook as I took it. Inside was a single line, written in the same handwriting that had haunted me all day. "You're smarter than I thought. But remember, this is just the beginning." I swallowed hard, my chest tight. The danger wasn't over. I had survived the first challenge, but the knowledge that my son had become capable of such calculated cruelty settled over me like a shadow. And yet, beneath the fear, a spark remained, a reminder that the boy I had raised, the lessons I had taught, still lived within him somewhere. I realized then that I had a choice. Let fear control me, or face what had become of my son, not as a child, not as my son, but as a man capable of destruction, and find a way to stop him before it was too late. The warehouse was silent once more, shadows stretching long and dark, and I knew with cold certainty that whatever came next, I could no longer react. I had to act. And the first step was understanding, uncovering, and staying one move ahead in a game that was far more dangerous than anything I had ever imagined. I left the warehouse with the envelope clutched in my hand, my mind sharper, my purpose clearer. Ethan had forced me to see the truth, but I would not let it consume me. The boy I had raised was gone, but the father in me remained. And from that moment, I swore I would outthink him, protect Robert, and survive. Whatever it took. Because now, the game had begun, and I was no longer just playing. I was fighting to win.